would fit any of those scenarios.
Yeah,
Do
pretty
you think,
much.
okay, do you think, are you referring to autonomy because you've heard me mention that in YouTube videos?
Yes.
Okay, so since you're familiar with my lines of reasoning, do you hold that the mind of man, your mind, um, either individually or collectively, is the final court of appeal as to what the nature of reality and facts are?
That's honestly, Darth, that's probably why I come in here and listen, because when you get to that point, um, it sounds like my headset's gonna I'm gonna switch over here, so if I go dead, I'll get
Okay,
back.
so you don't believe in
Um,
God, so your mind would be the final court of appeal, right?
well, here's the deal, Darth. When you get to that point, I'm like, I don't necessarily understand your argument
Why is it that every
at that
time I
point.
ask you why is it that every time I ask you a simple, fair question, you give me a response to something I didn't ask?
Well, there might be a purpose for that, and that's
Yeah.
because your question, in my mind, in my opinion, did not constitute just a yes or no answer. That's
Really?
hello?
What question did you have in mind that did not constitute a yes or no answer?
See, again, that last question you asked me, I didn't understand it the first time, so I can't
Okay.
even repeat it to say that's the
Okay.
last
Well,
question.
if
I
I say something
apologize.
that you don't if I say
Because
something you don't understand, can you please say I didn't understand you? Could you explain?
Okay, no problem. Absolutely. Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
your position is that there's no God. And I'm still this is my opening question. I want to know why you believe there's no God.
Well, Darth, she was asking you to explain autonomous reasoning. Like, what does that
Oh,
even?
autonomous
Yes.
reasoning means that
Thank you.
the mind of man,
Parakeet,
yeah,
thank you.
the mind of man
The toxic
is
Avengers
is
here.
yes, the toxic
Sorry.
parakeet, the toxic avenger. Um,
Okay, yeah.
the mind of man is seen by unbelievers as the final court of appeal as to interpreting facts. Okay, so is that what you
The
believe?
mind is the last corporate appeal,
Court of appeal,
court of appeal to determine
what the
facts,
nature of reality and facts are.
what the nature of reality of facts are. So my mind, whose mind? God's mind?
Your mind and or anyone else's mind in conjunction with yours.
Okay. Okay.
Do you believe that?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that because that's a fucking mouthful. Honestly, I would have to think about that.
So you're telling me the truth. You
I
haven't
admit
been
to you,
drinking
Darth,
today.
I'm not really good shooting from the hip.
So
So
you haven't
I
been
may have
drinking
to
today.
take something.
So you haven't been
No,
drinking.
my mind doesn't work that way, Darth.
You sure sound like you've
My
been
mind
drinking.
doesn't work that way. Well, great.
Yeah,
Whatever.
she sounds intoxicated.
Whatever. Whatever.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
that's what you
I'm not the only one who has come
Okay.
to the conclusion. And
Okay.
you know what?
Well,
And you see the
that's
thing is
fine.
that the reason why you don't believe in God is because you have a guilty conscience. Okay,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And people have
Okay.
guilty consciences for a variety of reasons. And in your case, you have a guilty conscience because you like to drink, and you've had an abortion, and you don't want God to exist. But you see, the God of the Bible says there is no sin that cannot be forgiven except the ultimate sin of rejecting God's convicting us of our need of salvation
I'm
and not
really
turning to
glad.
Him to salvation. Okay,
I'm
there
really
is no
glad
sin that
that
people can commit that God won't forgive
right,
unless you refuse to repent and turn to God for salvation.
right,
See, this is why people drink. It's because they have
right,
guilty consciences.
right,
And you see, the forgiveness of God from your perspective or our perspective is it's free. It doesn't cost us anything. And there aren't mental and physiological or physical side effects from that. So the best way to assuage our conscience is to come clean before God as our creator and turn to him as savior through Jesus Christ. And there are no side effects with drugs and drinking and various behaviors. There are side effects. Okay?
Okay.
So that's the reason why you're an atheist. You're not an
Oh,
atheist
shut up.
because you're not an atheist
Okie doke.
because there's no evidence for God. Because if I asked you
Okay.
to unpack that, you couldn't defend that.
Okay. Great.
It's because you have a
So,
guilty
what's
conscience,
next?
and because you have a guilty
What's next?
conscience, and you want to cling to your autonomy, you don't
What's
want to give up
next?
your. Okay, mute her. Okay. Oh, she left. Yeah, she was clearly a drunk. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought of. When she first started talking, she sounded inebriated.
Yeah, let's see if that ends up on Tom Rabbit's channel.
I don't care. Let them post it up there. It's good for the atheist ear. And you see people like that drink because they have a guilty conscience. Okay. She knows she killed her unborn baby and she has to live with that for the rest of her life. So because of that, she has to live with that guilty conscience every day rather than turn to God as our Savior, whom she knows God will forgive her, but she's unwilling to give
Wait
up
a
her
minute. Did she
autonomy.
tell you she got an abortion?
Yeah, I asked her point blank, right in the beginning. She told me she was an atheist, and I, used my sixth sense, and I said, "Yeah, have you had abortion?" And she immediately refused to answer the question. Women who haven't had abortions generally will respond by saying no. Okay.
Well, it upset her, and then so what she wanted to do was she wanted to resort to, trying to accuse you of wanting to nail her.
No, I said no. That was a She deliberately misrepresented. I said I nailed the question. I got the question accurate. I discerned
Yeah, I know,
very
but
early
she did
on.
that. She did that because your question,
And I didn't
upset her.
rub her nose in the fact that her
No,
nose
I'm
in the
not
fact
saying
that
you
she had an
did.
You guys hear
abortion.
me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Would you not have asked her, what would you make believe, or what kind of evidence are you looking for? Believe? I know you went
No,
in
no,
another
no, no,
direction.
no, Tangelo, I don't know how much you listened to. We came to the firm conclusion. I mean, I started picking up on it very early on, but that she was intoxicated. Okay.
I think what Tangelo is asking about the efficacy of the line of reasoning, about asking them what evidence they would accept.
I don't ask that question because I think that whatever they say is just it's bogus because you see in their world, in their frame of reference right now when you ask that question, nothing could change their mind in spite of the fact that they said God appeared to them, and because in their world anything can happen. Okay?
I think Eric Murphy versus Tyler Vela Tyler did this line
Yes.
of questioning with Eric, and Eric says some answer, and Tyler says, "Well, why would that be evidence for God? Why wouldn't that be just some, strange occurrence? Just some low probability occurrence?"
Yeah, and that's a brilliant response. And I think that was great that you brought that up.
Greg Bonson pointed out that if an atheist is really firm in their atheism, you could convince them that it's actually true that Jesus rose from the dead. And they would say, yeah, sure. In a big world, strange things happen. A dude rose from the dead. It's a conglomeration of strange phenomena.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean God exists.
I've actually heard atheists actually say that. Now, do we want to present the resurrection of Jesus Christ as a part of witnessing to people? Well, of course we do. Do we want to go through why we believe that historically? Yeah, that's called historical apologetics. But we're not going to do that in a way in order to quote prove the ultimate existence of God, because their very position of not accepting God itself is irrational. So trying to incrementally throw little bits and pieces of evidence at them, even the resurrection, is not going to actually change their position unless the Holy Spirit is convicting them and they're apt to becoming a Christian and then they actually do repent. So the point is, just merely appealing to the resurrection of Jesus alone to somebody who's denied the existence of God, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah, and Van Til said that the resurrection argument, apart from the Christian worldview, he says it's just simply a historical fact that occurred. That's all it is. It does
It's a
not reach any
historical
mystical fact.
anomaly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just a bizarre anomaly.
Well, someone
That's a
pointed out, maybe it was Darth. He said that actually, if they had decided that everything around them wasn't evidence for God, and that something else was, that would actually be irrational. Because in a world where God is, either all things are, or in a world God is not, then nothing's evidence for God. So
That's why,
they give an answer to the question. If you ask them what evidence would you accept, they haven't really thought through it. But if they give an answer just because they want to seem reasonable. But if they were actually logical about it and they actually understood what God we were talking about, they'd say, well, I've already decided that all the things I'm familiar with aren't evidence for God. So that means God doesn't exist. So nothing you could present would be evidence for God. Right?
yeah.
Another cop out is when they say that, oh, God knows what would convince me. So why doesn't he provide the evidence that will convince me?
Okay, well that's another atheist cliche, and I'm glad you brought that up.
That presupposes they don't know it already.
Yeah, that's right. So let's tackle that. Okay, Matt de la Bloviator has said that this is a very widespread atheist catchphrase, and you are bound to hear it sooner or later. So this is another deception on their part. So the reasoning goes like this: if God was omnibenevolent, God was all love and omniscient, he would know what it would take for me to see in that I would believe, and yet I don't believe. Okay, and they think that this is a clever form of reasoning. Okay,
blame shifting.
Well, yeah, that it is blame shifting, but what they're basically saying is the putative God that you have referenced. He's constructed a world in such a way that all the facts that I am generally acquainted with simply do not necessitate indicating God. Okay, that statement, that catchphrase that they make. Okay, that an omniscient God would surely know what it would take in order to get me to believe in him, and yet I don't see that. Okay, all that is a more sophisticated. No, I shouldn't. It's not sophisticated. It's a more verbally dressed up in drag statement that is the equivalent of, well, there's no evidence of God. Okay. If there was a God who is omniscient, then he would surely know what it would take to get me to believe, and yet I don't believe. Okay. But all that is just the statement, there is no evidence of God in drag. That's all it is.
Yeah,
the problem I have with that claim is that presupposes that they're not lying or they're not self-deceived to begin with to ask the question.
So what we need to look is it's basically saying, well, I've looked at the world around me, and I've concluded that all of the facts that I'm acquainted with do not necessitate referencing God. But your God, were he to exist, and he wanted me to believe that he exists, would have put something in place for me to believe. But since I don't believe, then that means that there's not a God who has made me to exist. Made me. There's not a God who desires me to believe and put in my walk of my life evidences that would get me to believe.
But he has gave them things. But he has gave them things it would take for them to believe. They just don't want to. So when they say, well, he know what it would take, he already has given it to you. You don't want to believe it.
Yeah, I often answer like this. I say, God has given enough light to those that want to believe and seek him, and he has given enough darkness to those that want to live independently from him.
Yeah, let me read this quote from Van Til. Van
I
Til
like that.
says,
I like that
"The
one.
philosophy of the pragmatist," this is concerning the resurrection. He says, "The philosophy of the pragmatist is to the effect that everything in the universe is unrelated, that such a fact as the resurrection of Jesus, granted it were a fact, would have
Okay,
no
stop.
Yeah.
That person has done that 3 or 4 times. Did anyone see who did that?
Oh, I did not.
Yeah, I've been looking for that guy too.
Okay.
Hey, we're gonna get you.
Oh,
Just a
Zulu,
matter
I
of
haven't
time.
seen you in a long
We're
time. Is
hunting you
Zulu in
down,
here?
boy. We better
Okay.
run,
Zulu,
Well,
how
boy.
are you?
if anybody
Okay.
see who's doing the heckling, okay, just give us the username and then we'll get rid of them. Okay.
Yeah. Let me read this quote. He
Why
says,
is Lauren? Hold on. Listen, just hold on. I want you to read that.
Sure.
Why is Lauren 22 server deafened and mute?
That was the person. I muted them and I server deafened them.
Why?
Because
Oh, that's
they
the
were making
person.
noise. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. I'm gonna. Okay. Are you now? Let me ask you this question because I made a mistake earlier with Lucas, so I want to be fair. Oh, that person left. Could it be that that person just had an open mic?
No, they opened their mic, said a word to disrupt the conversation, and then muted themselves
Okay.
again.
All right. Good. I'm gonna ban that account. Go ahead, bro, Joe. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. He says, he, he says that a fact as the resurrection of Jesus, granted it were a fact, would have no significance for us who live 2,000 years after him. It is apparent from this that if we really defend Christianity as a historical religion, we must at the same time defend the theism upon which Christianity is based. This involves us in philosophical discussion. To interpret a fact of history involves a philosophy of history. But a philosophy of history is at the same time a philosophy of reality as a whole. Thus, we are driven to the philosophical discussion all the time and everywhere. Yet, in defending the theistic foundation of Christianity, we, in the nature of the case, deal almost exclusively with philosophical argument.
Okay. Where did you get that from?
That's his from Christian Apologetics, Chapter 1, The System of Truth.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I have that and I've read that. I got to go back over that. Yeah. To interpret history involves a philosophy of history. To interpret a fact requires a philosophy of fact.
Yeah, he says earlier, it is impossible and useless to seek to vindicate Christianity as a historical religion by a discussion of facts only. Suppose we assert that Christ arose from the grave. We assert further that his resurrection proves his divinity. This is the nerve of the quote historical argument. For Christianity, yet a pragmatic philosopher will refuse to follow this line of reasoning. Granted, he allows that Christ actually arose from the grave, he will say that this proves nothing more than something very unusual took place in the case of, quote, that man Jesus. The philosophy of the pragmatist is to the effect that everything in the universe is unrelated, and that such a fact as the resurrection of Jesus, granted it were a fact, would have no significance for us who live 2,000 years after him. It is apparent from this that if we would really defend Christianity as a historical religion, we must at the same time defend the theism upon which Christianity is based. This involves us in philosophical discussion. To interpret a fact of history involves a philosophy of history. And that's a really good section.
It is, and that's in Christian apologetics, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is when it clicked for me about presuppositionalism, because I said, well, think about a Muslim. Do you really think giving him the historical argument's going to help? They're just going to say, "Oh, Allah deceived the nations." Really? So we're going to waste our time presenting these facts? No, knock down his worldview, and therefore everything is evidence for God. You have to be a presuppositionalist. There's no way around it. Which is interesting because
I think that this is a very interesting way to do apologetics. I still think that atheists need to understand why it makes no sense to believe that we can explain things without referencing God.
Well, that's exactly what Van Til is saying there. We cannot argue as though facts alone are the issue. It's the interpretation of the facts that are the issue. I mean, this is what Ken
What's the
Ham
name
has
of
been
that?
saying. Christian apologetics. By the way, you really should be consistently reformed if you're a presuppositionalist. But Van Til's going to, if you read that, you're going to see him attack Arminian apologetics. He's going to attack Roman Catholicism. I mean, he's just going to eviscerate Roman Catholicism just from the beginning of his book.
So
What
if
did you say?
if an
You have to
if an
be
atheist
reformed?
asks you,
Sorry, go
Mhm.
ahead.
if an atheist asks you, why do I need to reference God in order to have a consistent or coherent worldview? How do you answer that?
Because in order for facts to be facts, they have to start in the mind of God. They're then implemented within his plan of creation and redemptive history. And
Why?
Darth, you have something in the background. It's like
all right, yeah, it'll
a
stop in a
trailer.
minute. Yeah, it'll stop in a couple of seconds. Hold on.
Why, if we don't do that? If we just
Okay.
say
All right.
things just
First of
are.
all, I'm trying to explain to you. Okay, we always start with God's revelation. We
He
don't
gets to that
start.
at the end.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
We don't start with the mind of man. We start with the revelation of God. And they'll say, "Oh, well, that's you're not being neutral." Well, neither are you. So the point is this:
Yeah.
facts are what they are because they start in the mind of God, and then they're implemented in his plan of creation and his redemptive history. Okay. So the rock on the side of the road is a rock because it is within God's world. Okay. This world that we are in, that we are ensconced in, is the product of God's mind, and it is because of his sovereignty and lordship over it at this very moment. So facts require context, they require worldview, and they require metaphysical context. And God is that ultimate reference point. Okay. Now,
Right.
if one chooses to deny that all the facts together, not just this fact over there might indicate God, whatever, if one fact indicates God, then they all do, right? This is the mistake of evidentialists, okay? Now, without God being the concrete universal that everything is tied to and derives its context from, then all of the so-called facts are no facts at all. They're just unconnected and unrelated. What we just have is the autonomous mind of man coming along, starting with certain beliefs that he can never ground, never prove, and then he tries to do an inductive survey and then throw a mental grid over it, trying to explain what things are. But
An
you see,
inductive survey in a world in which he doesn't even know induction's viable.
yeah, and so he doesn't know any interpretation of facts, either individually or collectively, could turn out to be false tomorrow. Okay? So, for example, tomorrow we could all start levitating because the aliens who did this life experiment on this planet turned off the electricity. Okay?
That's a good point. I learned that. That was also one point which you made in
Now
regards.
that's a bit of a humor I'm throwing in there, but the point is, if you talk to scientists,
point.
you talk to atheists, they have an open system. They don't have a closed system where they have an identifiable, attestable, not testable, attestable, or a defensible absolute and ultimate from which all things derive and depend. That ultimate or absolute would be the ultimate reference point. It would be the source of all possibility. In biblical theology, it's called the principium ascendia, okay, the ground of all being. Right? Now, in order to explain to the unbeliever why their position is incoherent, they need to understand what they are not believing. Okay? And then once they understand what they are not believing, we can juxtapose that to what they do believe. But what they do believe doesn't have coherence because there is no ultimate frame of reference. They have no context.
Right.
For
I
anything.
think William Lane Craig said that, he said it in a different context, but I think this is right. He said a fact apart from its context is inherently ambiguous. If you have these facts that do not come a part of a system, well, they're meaningless. What would that even mean that there are facts apart from a system? And so
I think this is something which would be good if you break it down a bit in order for others to understand.
Here's an example of how any contextual layer can change the factness of a situation. and I realized that I was playing a game with my nephew, my little baby nephew, and we were playing. I call it's the game that's called "You Didn't Know But," right? And he was like coming up behind me. I knew he was there, and he like jumped on me from behind, and he says, "You didn't know, but I just snuck up on you." And I said, "Well, you didn't know, but I have eyes in the back of my head." And then he says, "Well, you didn't know, but I'm a little teeny tiny slug." So do you see what we're doing is we're adding different layers of context to change the situation. We're trying to like get one over on the other one, you know what I mean? But it's a game in which the context of the situation is being changed by additional layers of context being added, right? Well, if you don't
I'd
know
like
what
to
the
You could
book
you
differ.
could
ma-
think of you could think of in those heist movies as well when you have people
Yeah.
that are like double crossing each other, and so you say, "Oh, I had a plan. I actually did this," but then somebody said, "No, I did this to override this plan that you did." You see
Yep.
this in a lot of older
So
movies or
Right,
like
right,
super
right,
old
Yeah,
right.
so the
movies.
point is this:
Yeah,
you
you
said
won't be able
heist
I thought
movie.
about
That's a
that.
good example.
you
Yeah.
won't be able
yeah,
to interpret the
Yeah.
nature of any particular fact unless you know the final context, that there are no more layers of
right,
context that will alter the factness
right.
of the fact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
now
I
that we
like to
talk,
think in
now that we
terms
touch on
of
this, I was juxtaposing this with like an analogy because you remember when Darth, you've been saying that we gotta dumb this down like to its
Yeah.
minutest terms for the atheists.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
an analogy I thought about is like think of the game Monopoly. Like think of a house or a hotel or something like that. What would those pieces even mean without the context of the game Monopoly itself?
that's a great
They
example.
wouldn't mean, they wouldn't be anything. They wouldn't have any reference to that
Right,
whatsoever.
they would have no meaning. I when I've been able
Very
to
good
communicate a
point.
presuppositionalism effectively to people, I typically bring up the example of Islam. The historical argument for the resurrection of Christ totally changes given the fact that Islam were true. If it were true, it would be all the evidence, all the historical accounts from Tacitus to the Talmud, they would all simply be Allah's great deception on humanity. So the only way to interpret that fact and to get around that is the question of a worldview. So you would have to challenge them and take down their worldview. Once you do that, well, then you see the Christian worldview is the only one that can interpret any facts because Islam is self-refuting.
I think this is an important point. It's like you have a game, but the game, how it is played, rules, they have to be set up first. And if there are no rules, then basically you can play anything and it's chaotic and unordered, right?
Look, I just heard today. I was
Yeah,
watching this stupid atheist named Myth Vision. He's a guy who glories in trying to discredit the historicity of the Bible, and he said,
What he calls himself, myth division.
"Yeah, that's the name of his stupid podcast." Okay, and he thinks he's smart, but he's not. And he said, "Well, you know what?" He goes, "There isn't anything that we can't explain naturally." Well, the answer is, this is a self delusion, because you can't explain everything naturalistically. Because then the question is, what is it that is finally and ultimately fundamental? What is the source of all possibility? What is that? Now, can they answer that question? No, they cannot. And since they cannot tell us what is ultimate and absolute, what is the ground of all being, then they cannot explain everything naturally. But when they claim they can claim everything naturally, they're bluffing. Okay? They are blowing smoke. You know, Lawrence Krauss, if you listen to my interaction with Lawrence Krauss, and if you haven't listened to it, then go onto YouTube and listen to it. It's very short. He tried to pull the same crap, that we don't have a need for superstition or magic or the supernatural. We can explain everything naturalistically. But then when I asked him, what is it that is ultimate? What is fundamental in the source of all possibility? He said, I don't know. And why would that even matter? Well, the reason why it matters is because you said you could explain everything naturally. But now that you've stated you don't know what's fundamental, then you can't say that everything can be explained naturally. Because if everything could be explained naturally, that would include what is ultimate, absolute, and the source of all possibility. Okay? So when they say they can explain everything naturally, this is like a used car salesman telling you that this car was driven by a little old lady to the supermarket once a week.
Well,
then he
if they
will say,
can't,
why is it necessary that an ultimate source of reality exists?
Well, that's another issue. The point is this: when they say they can interpret everything naturally, well, that's going to have to include within that conceptual scheme what is fundamental and absolute that will then institute and secure what regularities there are.
in other words, the final layer of context. If they don't know what the final layer of context is, then
that final layer of context, that's what I think has to be broken down in order that they understand what is meant by that. I think that's a very important point. And I understood when you talked to Leophilius and you asked him, do you think that the laws of physics, that they are eternal or that they are necessary? And he said no. And then you said, well, then your worldview crumbles down. Why? Because in the laws of physics, they can pop up and go out in an unordered
it could be, we could pull a T jump and we could say, well, it could be that because of some cosmological phenomenon of the origin of the universe, that within our particular universe, physics popped up and only lasts for let's say 13 billion years, and then it stops.
You could play the game I play with my nephew. You didn't know, but
then they'll resort to their probabilistic reasoning. Okay, and say, but you see, it doesn't matter that you have predictive capability. They make a big deal out of predictive capability. Look, in a chance world, you can get a series of things right. It's still chance.
It could also not be. It could also be that the universe lasts just for 5 minutes. There is no rule that secures what has to be 5 minutes, persisting 5 minutes or 13 billion
Just
years.
Don't forget, this is why Van Til says he refers to God by different terms. He refers to him as the concrete universal, right? He refers to God as the all conditioner. He refers to God as the ultimate, right?
Well, how I was gonna, can I, before you move off the subject, I was gonna mention, how would you even know that your predictions are correct? Because they could just be superficially what you expect, but they actually, the actual nature of the fact is not what your prediction was.
Of course, right?
I think an important term maybe to introduce here would be an ordering principle.
Let me just say this real quick before I forget, okay? Take a look at the problem between quantum mechanics and Einstein's relativity, right? They are both, they are incongruent with each other. One of them has to be false, okay? Even secularists recognize this, but they're not abandoned because they have predictive capability, okay? So one of them is not quite correct. It's like, for example, the previous Newtonian laws of celestial mechanics. Everybody thought that was, almost the final say because of the predictive capability. But along came Einsteinian relativity having greater accuracy and predictive capability, right? So the point is, why do people hold to certain views of quantum mechanics? Because of predictive capability. Why do they hold to Einsteinian relativity? Because of predictive capability. But Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum mechanics are at odds with each other, and experts in the field of science recognize one of them is not quite right.
They have come to a limit where they cannot go further and say this is right and the other is wrong, or there is a unifying theory which explains all the phenomena described.
Well, they don't know that any of them are correct because they don't know what the next layer of context is.
But I think another very important point, which I just said now, is that you need to introduce order in the physical universe. And if there is no principle which injects that order and holds everything in order, there can be just chaos and there is no predictability at all.
So the point is, in order for the unbeliever to believe anything, it's going to require a belief in some level of continuity, or as we will say, the regularity of nature.
Yeah.
But in order to
Continuity.
believe in the regularity of nature, which is that the future will be like the past, doesn't mean the future will be identical to the past. Okay? So for example, if tomorrow pigs started to fly, that would not destroy the uniformity of nature. The uniformity of nature would simply be revised. Okay? And the future would still be like the past, although pigs flying would be dissimilar from yesterday. But in order to believe in the regularity of nature, in order to speak intelligibly, the regularity of nature must either itself be absolute and eternal, or something else must be absolute that imposes in perpetuity the uniformity of nature.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
But the unbeliever who says, "Oh, I don't have a reason to believe in God," cannot give a rational justification for what is either absolute or ultimate that would then impose and secure the uniformity of nature, which will be an underlying basis for there to be intelligibility. So the very criterion of belief that they use to dismiss God, they throw out the window when they adopt their metaphysic. Okay?
And when you
So
press them down, they will just say, oh, but we don't know yet. It's not God, but we don't know what that ordering principle is. That's what they resort to.
That doesn't help them. That doesn't help them because they
that
still won't
either
be able to
means
ground that.
it either means that they're lying, or they're just speaking out of mental ineptness. Because here's the bottom line: if they don't know what that absolute contextual layer is, that final layer, okay, the ground of all being, then they cannot have a rational justification for the uniformity of nature, because whatever continuity there was in the past, it could abruptly stop.
Exactly. That's what you're saying about continuity.
If they say they don't know,
the universe could be 5 minutes old or 13 billion years old. But another important factor is that why are the laws of physics constituted in that way that our physical universe is even possible? And that includes the fine-tuning, which is requires a set of physical constants which are just right in order for the atoms to have the right fundamental forces, stars to being able to be formed, and so forth.
And by the way, the fine tuning can be presented presuppositionally, because the fine tuning would be a part of an example of continuity, right? So the question is, if this continuity is not itself instituted and secured by God, then what reason do they have to expect the continuity to continue? The answer is they don't.
I think that thing about continuity, that thing about continuity, I think it is very important, because this gives substantiation to that whole argument. There would not necessarily have to be any continuity at all if there is no God which secures that continuity.
But here's the issue: if they say there is something ultimate and they don't know what it is, the problem with that claim is they would have to have something specific and ontologically identify them to say I don't know. So it's impossible for them to say I don't know, because for them not to have anything identified means they don't even have a system to even say I don't know.
They have no ultimate or absolute to which they could identify and demonstrate. So their very worldview, the coherence of even their naturalism, depends on such an ultimate or absolute, yet it is unidentified. Therefore,
resort to a multiverse.
No. It wouldn't matter, okay? Because even a multiverse is just simply multiverse is just an attempt to expand the number of trials in order to explain the fine tuning and regularity. Okay,
I think from an overall sense, further down the road, what you're saying is they can resort to making stuff up. They could, but they could never substantiate how they know.
No, but the point is, listen,
we know what's ultimate because it's revealed itself. That's how we know it.
Without identifying what is fundamental and is the basis and source of the continuity or regularity of nature, then their belief And the expectation of the regularity of nature is unjustified. Okay? So they
could say in that multiverse there are universes which hold that.
You're not understanding. The multiverse would just simply be an expansion of continuity. Okay, that's all it is. Okay, whether you believe in a universe or a multiverse, these are just different. These are just different representations of continuity. Okay, so the question is this: the continuity. Either the continuity is ethereal, or there's an absolute and ultimate that imposes it, right? So without the mind and plan of God keeping the continuity and perpetuity, there's no rational basis to expect that consistencies of the past will continue at any time. It's not a rational expectation.
It goes also into the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And I mean, if there would be nothing at the bottom of reality, then there could be also no continuity. It could be simply a continuity of 5 minutes and then stopping to exist again. There would be no, as you say, there is nothing that would secure our existence.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that there's nothing that would secure the metaphysical context so that there can be intelligibility. Okay? They have no rational grounds to expect that the future will be like the past. Right?
Yeah, it goes into that line of reasoning. I agree with you. There is no reason why the laws of physics and the fine-tuning would continue in the way it is. What holds the fine-tuning in order that things continue to be finely tuned the way they are, in order for the universe even to exist?
You see, you can't attack this piecemeal, right? Because it's not really an evidence-based issue, right? This is a world view issue. So you have to show them that whatever they say they believe, they can't believe it on their own terms, right? Since they cannot identify what is ultimate, what is absolute, therefore what they say they believe, it derives from nothing. Okay? It just is. Okay?
Just is, exactly. There is no alternative to a fundamental causal necessary being which instantiates everything else. Darth, would you like to review something?
I'm right in the middle of work, so I can't do it right now. Maybe later.
Okay.
It's your job.
I paint miniature Hummels.
Hummels?
What?
What are those?
They're like little garden gnomes,
Interesting.
except they're like little decorative things that old ladies buy. They're like little kids that sit on seesaws and that sort of thing. Little glass figurines. Except I believe Darth does the microscopic ones.
Did anyone see Joe Biden's first press conference?
How dare you talk about our commander-in-chief like that?
I think it was his first one.
How dare you talk about President Kamala like that?
I apologize.
Yeah, I hope you trip and fall down when you're walking up some stairs.
Or a slight gust of wind trips you.
I hope when you're at the local pool, some kids start pulling the hair on your legs. No, I didn't see his press conference, by the way, to answer your question.
Parakeet, did you see my DM?
Oh, sorry, I was doing something else.
So, Kitty, why are you a atheist? Are you there, Kitty? We don't usually get a lot of female atheists in here. Earth to Kitty. Is my mic working?
You're working.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Kitty, are you there? Can you tell us why you're an atheist? Because male atheists are very common, but females are less common.
Is anyone talking?
You are.
See, one writer said that we should not grant that the unbeliever wants God's world and then they want to surgically remove God, right? They're going to have to start from scratch, but they don't want to do that. I mean, look how arrogant Lawrence Krauss was when he says we don't need to invoke a God. We don't need to invoke, metaphysical. What did he say? Woo woo or something like that. We can explain the world naturally. Well, what he means by that is, yeah, we're appealing to the laws of nature, but there's no rhyme or reason why there are the laws of nature, or that we should expect them to continue, or that they've been continuous in the past, or for that matter, sporadic. Okay? Anybody ever had a mechanical or an electrical device, or like a car, that sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't? Right? Anybody ever had a device like that? I'm sure everyone's experienced that.
Yep.
For all they know, the laws of nature, we could say hypothetically they could have been pretty consistent, for a couple of thousand years.
Didn't you ask Lawrence Krauss where the laws of physics came from?
Yeah, I said to him, what is it that is ultimate and fundamental? And by the way, you'll notice in the last few weeks I've been using the word fundamental more, because I'm trying to dumb this down. When you say ultimate, this is more of a philosophical concept. When you say what is it that is foundational and fundamental, they can hang their mind on that more readily than ultimate. Okay? Because when people hear ultimate these days, it's just like, when people hear the word ultimate, they think of a new laundry detergent or toothpaste. It's ultimate, right?
It's marketing.
Yeah, it is marketing. Do you know how many times laundry detergent has been new and improved since the 1950s? It should be, the laundry detergent should be making your dinner too and folding your clothes.
That's right. It's always new and improved, but it's always just soap.
So, Kitty, why are you an atheist? Oh, okay. So we got a troll. Okay.
Somebody get the clown noses out of storage. We got another one.
Yeah, we've heard that practical joke before. That's not original. And for those of the real men of us in here, okay, we've heard that before, especially the more talented ones. You see, when the unbeliever rejects God as creator, when they reject the creator-creature distinction, we always have to keep in mind as to what they're not believing. They're not believing that God is absolute. They're not believing that he's ultimate. They're not believing that he is the one who institutes and secures creation. They are not believing that God is the one who has instituted the principle of continuity along with the principle of discontinuity. They're not understanding that God is the concrete universal where everything is tied and related and deriving depending upon him. Therefore, their world is just an array of particulars and events that have no rhyme or reason as to why they are. And when they appeal to laws of nature, they cannot justify it. And when you show them they can't justify it, then they will. I guarantee you, for those of you Christian apologists in here, when you hit them with the problem of the uniformity of nature, their go-to response will be predictive success. It's guaranteed they will go for it. Okay? An appeal to predictive success is no different than appealing to past consistency. Okay? So what? It's just a series of consistencies. In a chance world, things like that can happen. You see, their very position of non-belief, their very position of the rejection of God, destroys their own worldview, because they say, listen, you you need to prove that which you are invoking as absolute and ultimate or fundamental. You need to prove that. But when they start talking about continuity and the uniformity of nature and the causal principle, right? Then what is it that imposes that? And then they're going to go, well, I don't know. Why does it even matter? Well, because then you're claiming that something is without a knowing that it has actually been instituted, as opposed to its mere happenstance of consistency. So to be an atheist, to be a naturalist, is to instantaneously violate the very principle that you're using to deny God on. I refer to that as the atheists are violating their own criterion of belief.
So, Darth, when are we getting the first book on Darth Dawkins, an analysis of my thought?
Well, it's actually coming out in 4 weeks, but that's not the title. It's entitled "Humility and How I Achieved It."
Now, how many chapters will be in that?
So far, probably around 12.
Is that going to be like Michael Knowles' book? I really loved it reading that one.
Michael Knowles' book? You mean?
Yeah, Reasons for a Vote for Democrats. It's a bestseller.
No, there's a few more. There's a few more letters on my book than his. Okay.
I love that. Just a few more.
Perhaps maybe everyone in here should try it out if you haven't read it. It's compelling. Ben Shapiro recommended it.
The first chapter is hubris and why it's important. You ever notice all the sexual deviance in the Western world? How they're trying to affix pride to their sexual deviancy? If something's normal and okay, why do you need to be proud of it?
And that right there is the $64,000 question.
All right, I'm going to be listening in, but I got to finish my work. These damn Hummels are hard to paint.
Especially when you have to use paintbrushes that small, huh? You have to use some tweezers to grip some tinier tweezers that can grip the miniature